The Galaxy called their ship a ghost, but ghosts are supposed to be quiet. The Marigold was anything but. She groaned like a dying beast, her steel-patched hull complaining with every minor course correction, and her engines coughed out ionized particles in a messy versus sputtering trail that cleaner ships would have scanned as a critical malfunction. To Captain Eva Rostova, it was the sound of home. She stood on the bridge, a cramped space that smelled of ozone, stale coffee, and the faint, coppery scent of overworked circuitry. Her worn leather boots planted firmly on the vibrating deck plates. Her knuckles were scarred from a lifetime of wrestling with rusted bolts and fried conduits, and her dark hair was pulled back in a tight, practical knot that did little to tame the stray strands framing a face set with grim determination. They were deep in the quarantine zone of Cygnus X-1, a graveyard of ships officially sealed off by the Concordate decades ago after a supposed viral outbreak. To the pristine, white-hulled patrols of the Concordate, the zone was a cosmic tomb, a monument to the dangers of imperfection. To Ava and her crew, it was a living. The Concordate saw contagion. Ava saw salvage. Perfectly good reactor cores and sensor arrays just waiting to be stripped from ships whose only crime was being forgotten. Anything on the long range, Eva asked, her voice low and even, never quite rising above the ship's cacophony. Jax, her co-pilot and resident tech prodigy, leaned forward in his chair, his face illuminated by the green glow of the scanner. He was young, barely 20, with eyes that still held a spark of adventure that the Galaxy hadn't managed to extinguish yet. Just the usual echoes and ghost signals. "Captain," he replied, tapping a command into his console. "The Concordate's quarantine boys are screaming at us to turn back, but their signals are so old they're practically begging. The big prize is just ahead, dead on schedule." The big prize was a derelict Concordate science vessel, the Stellark's Purity, that had gone dark in the zone 50 years ago. According to the whispers traded in the lawless ports of the Outer Rim, it was carrying advanced terraforming tech, something that would fetch enough credits to keep the Marigold flying for a decade. Ava didn't care about the tech. She cared about the freedom that came with it. Freedom from debt, from hunting for scraps, from the ever-present fear of a Concordate Purity Patrol deciding their ship was too much of a blight on the star lanes to be allowed to exist. As they drew closer, the Stellarship's Purity emerged from the dust and debris like a bone-white cathedral. It was flawless, even in death. Concordate ships weren't built. They were grown from crystalline alloys, their forms perfect, symmetrical, and utterly sterile. There were no visible scorch marks, no hull breaches. It just floated, silent and inert. "Looks like they just turned the lights off and went home," Jax muttered, a hint of awe in his voice. Ava felt a different emotion, a cold, familiar knot of resentment. This ship, abandoned and forgotten, was still a more perfect creation than anything her people had ever built. Her people, from the lost colony of Elysian Prime, a world the Concordate had deemed non-essential and left to be glassed by raiders to create a strategic buffer zone. The official report called it a tragic loss. Ava called it murder by bureaucracy. "Greg, you're with me," she said, turning from the viewport. "Jax, you have the bridge. Keep the engines warm and cycle the comms on a random algorithm. Don't answer anything. Don't transmit anything. Just look like another piece of drifting junk." A massive, four-armed shape detached itself from the engine room doorway. "Greg, a hulking Rhodian whose species had been denied concordate membership for their genetic instability, nodded once, his heavy tool belt clanking against his thick hide. He didn't need words. His loyalty to Eva was absolute, forged in the fires of a shared past they never spoke of. The air inside the concordate vessel was cold, sterile, and still. Their mag boots clanked with unnerving loudness in the echoing silence of the pristine corridors. Everything was white, seamless, and unnervingly clean. There were no bodies, no signs of struggle. It was a ship of ghosts. Powers been deliberately severed at the primary conduit. Greg rumbled, his deep voice a physical vibration in the air as he ran a thick, three-fingered hand over a wall panel. Clean cut. Not a failure. Ava's unease grew with every step. This wasn't a salvage mission anymore. It was an investigation. They found the bridge, and the sight made Eva's breath catch. The command crew were all there, slumped in their perfect ergonomic chairs, looking as if they had simply fallen asleep. Their silver uniforms were immaculate, their faces peaceful. But a closer look revealed a faint, web-like tracery of black veins just beneath their skin. A bioagent, fast, clean, and terrifyingly efficient. This ship hadn't been abandoned. It had been sanitized. Captain. Greg's voice was urgent. He pointed toward a secondary chamber off the bridge, a prefect's private ready room. The door was slightly ajar. Eva drew the heavy plasma cutter she used for salvage, its weight a comforting reality in this sterile nightmare, and pushed the door open. Inside, a man sat rigidly in a high-backed chair. Alive. He was dressed in the immaculate white and gold of a concordate prefect, his face a mask of aristocratic disdain, though a tremor in his hand betrayed his fear. Behind him, a single stasis pod hissed softly, its cryo-fluid glowing a faint blue. He wasn't one of the crew, his uniform was a higher rank, and he was breathing. "Identify yourselves. Contaminants," the prefect said, his voice laced with an authority that was absurd given his situation. Eva ignored the insult. "Looks like you missed your ride." The prefect's gaze flickered to the dead crew on the bridge, then back to Ava's rust-stained overalls and Greg's intimidating form. They were compromised. A necessary sacrifice to maintain purity. I was delayed in my own extraction. "You were left behind," Ava stated flatly. She gestured with her cutter. "What's in the pod?" For the first time, a crack appeared in his composure. "That is a matter of concordate security. It is not for impure eyes to see." Before Eva could press further, a piercing alarm blared through the Marigold's open comm link in her helmet. It was Jax. "Captain, we've got Company A Concordate Sanitizer Fleet just warped in. They're hailing us, demanding we surrender for purification." Ava's blood ran cold. Sanitizer fleets weren't military. They were exterminators. They didn't disable ships. They atomized them. "We're leaving," she snapped. Turning to the prefect, "You're coming with us. You can explain why your friends are so eager to clean up your mess. On the way." The prefect, whose name she would learn was Silas, protested. But Greg's patient, heavy presence behind him was a more compelling argument than any words. As they raced back to the airlock, Silas clutched a small silver data core in his hand, a detail Eva noted but didn't have time to question. Back on the bridge of the Marigold, the chaos was a symphony. Alarms blared. The hull groaned under the strain of a hard burn, and Jax's fingers flew across his console, pushing the ship's ancient systems to their breaking point. Outside, 3 concordate sanitizer vessels moved with the silent, synchronized grace of predators. They were shaped like polished scalpels, and they began firing precise, white-hot lances of energy that were designed not to explode, but to sublimate matter, to erase it from existence. They're not trying to disable us. They're trying to delete us, Jax yelled, banking the ship so hard that Ava and Silas had to brace themselves against the bulkheads. They're corralling us, cutting off every jump vector. Silas, his face pale and slick with sweat, stared at the tactical display in horror. Their patterns, they are flawless. The central AI is predicting your every move. You cannot outrun them. Ava grabbed the manual flight controls, her scarred hands moving with an instinct born of 1,000 near misses. The ship's automated systems were screaming in protest. Good. She gritted out, her eyes locked on the dense debris field. They were rapidly approaching, the shattered remains of a freighter convoy from a forgotten war. The AI can't predict this. She shoved the throttle forward, plunging the Marigold not away from the danger, but directly into it. The ship shuddered violently as it entered the cloud of rock and twisted metal. Proximity alerts shrieked like banshees as asteroids the size of small moons tumbled past the viewport. Silas cried out in alarm. "This is madness. Your navigation computer cannot possibly process this many variables. I'm not using the computer," Ava yelled back over the din. She was flying by sight, by feel, by the memory of every junk field she'd ever navigated. Her movements were erratic, illogical, and utterly human. She didn't fly in smooth arcs. She slammed the thrusters in short, violent bursts, letting the ship's momentum carry them through gaps that shouldn't exist, using the spinning debris as a shield. The concordate ships followed, but their perfect formations began to break. Their AI, designed for the clean emptiness of open space, was struggling. It saw the debris field as an impassable wall of statistical noise. It saw the Marigold's sputtering engine and flickering power signatures not as the ship's normal state of being, but as critical damage, signs of an imminent demise. It calculated that Ava's ship should have torn itself apart minutes ago. Hull integrity at 60%, Jax shouted. Aft shields are gone. On the main screen, one of the sanitizer ships, attempting to mimic one of Ava's reckless turns, miscalculated. Its wing clipped a massive chunk of rock, and the crystalline alloy, so strong against energy weapons, shattered like glass. The ship spun away, crippled. They rely on their systems too much. Ava breathed, a grim smile touching her lips for the first time. They've forgotten how to just fly. She saw her chance a narrow corridor through the densest part of the field. It was a suicide run by any sane calculation. "Greg, I need you to manually override the coolant safeties on the main reactor. Give me everything you've got for 30 seconds, a confirmation grunt echoed from the engine room. The lights on the bridge flickered and dimmed as all non-essential power was rerouted. Silas watched, his indoctrinated mind reeling. This wasn't a crew, it was a chaotic organism, each part acting with a desperate, uncoordinated synergy that somehow worked. He saw Greg physically wrestling a sparking power conduit into place, heard Jax rattling off navigation hazards that weren't on any chart, and watched Eva pilot a dying ship through hell with nothing but nerve and instinct. The Marigold screamed as the engines overloaded, surging forward in a blaze of uncontrolled power. They shot through the gap, debris scraping and tearing at their hull, and emerged on the other side, battered and broken, but alive. Behind them, the two remaining concordate ships hesitated at the entrance to the corridor. their AI forbidding such a high-risk maneuver. That hesitation was all Eva needed. Jax, plot a jump. Anywhere. The dirtier the better. As the nav computer slowly, painfully calculated their escape, Silas finally looked at Eva, his arrogance shattered, replaced by a dawning, terrifying understanding. They weren't just trying to kill me, he whispered, holding up the data core. They were trying to destroy this. The Concordate's purity protocol. It's not just a philosophy. It is a weapon. They have identified over 40 species, including yours, for systematic cleansing. They're not building a perfect society. They're building an empty one. The weight of his words settled on the bridge, heavier than any gravity well. This was no longer about salvage, or escape, or even survival. Eva looked at the star chart, at the vast, uncaring darkness dotted with the home worlds of a dozen species she'd traded with, drunk with, and fought alongside. Her personal vendetta against the Concordate suddenly felt small, selfish. The ghost ship they had boarded had given up its secrets, and now the ghosts were screaming for justice. "Where do we go?" Jax asked, his voice subdued. "No Concordate-controlled system is safe. No one will believe us." Ava stared at the data core in Silas's hand, then at the bruised and bleeding reflection of her own face in the dark screen. There was only one place in the galaxy lawless enough, dangerous enough, and mad enough to listen. "Set a course for the Veil," she said, her voice steady and hard as forged steel. "We're going to see some pirates." The Marigold, trailing smoke and shedding sisses of its own abused hull, limped into the void, leaving the pristine killers of the Concordate behind in a graveyard of their own making. A testament to the fact that perfection was no match for the simple, chaotic, and desperate will to survive. The jump was a scream of tearing metal and protesting circuits. When the Marigold dropped back into real space, she wasn't flying so much as falling apart in a vaguely forward direction. Red emergency lights pulsed across the bridge, casting long, dancing shadows that made the cramped space feel like the inside of a failing heart. A high-pitched klaxon wailed a steady rhythm of despair. Life support is failing on decks 4 through 7, hull breaches in the aft cargo bay, and the port engine nacelle is venting plasma. Jax's voice was strained, his usual youthful confidence frayed into a thin wire of panic. He wasn't flying a ship anymore. He was performing triage on a corpse. Grak Eva's voice cut through the noise, a solid, anchoring presence. "Seal the nacelle, I don't care how. Use your boot if you have to, Jax. Reroute all available power to the inertial dampeners and life support on this deck. Forget the rest of the ship for now." Silas, the former Concordate prefect, was braced against a bulkhead, his pristine white uniform smudged with grease and his face a mask of disbelief. He watched as Grak, without a word, grabbed a heavy-duty magnetic clamp and a sheet of salvaged plating and lumbered toward the engine room, sparks showering from a ruptured conduit as he passed. "Your methods are primitive," Silas stammered, his eyes wide as he saw Jax physically yanking cables from one console and jamming them into another, bypassing half a dozen fried circuit boards. "They're what we have," Eva retorted, her hands already flying over a manual control panel, inputting stabilization commands that the ship's dying computer could no longer handle. "Your perfect systems tried to get us erased. Our junk is what's keeping us breathing. For the next 6 hours, they were not a crew, but a frantic repair team adrift in the black. Grake, using little more than brute force and a profound understanding of how stressed metal behaves, managed to patch the engine bleed. Jax, with a manic brilliance, jury-rigged a power grid that bypassed 3 decks of the ship, turning them into a cold, airless tomb, but keeping the bridge and engine room alive. Eva oversaw it all, her calm unwavering, her mind a constant whirlwind of calculations and contingencies. She had them scavenge parts from their own ship, cannibalizing a galley food synthesizer to repair a coolant pump and stripping the wiring from the crew bunks to patch the comm system. It was ugly, desperate work, the kind of organized chaos that Silas's orderly, concordant mind could barely comprehend. During a brief, tense lull in the chaos, Ava found Silas in the small observation dome, staring at the pinprick stars. The data core lay on the console before him, inert but radiating a palpable menace. "You said they were building an empty galaxy," Eva said. Joining him, he didn't look at her. Worse, a silent one. He activated the core. A holographic display shimmered into existence, not with text or schematics, but with faces. Hundreds of them, from dozens of species. A 4-armed Rhodian, like Grake. A graceful, feathered avian from the Cygnus colonies. A crystalline entity from the silica reefs of Kepler 186f. And a woman with dark hair and defiant eyes that looked hauntingly like Ava's. "These are the designations," Silas explained, his voice hollow. "Species deemed genetically impure, culturally dissonant, or technologically chaotic. My people, the Elysians, are on there," Eva said, her voice a low growl. Silas nodded. "Designation 734. Reason failure to adhere to concordant development protocols, resulting in societal collapse." Your world wasn't a strategic buffer. It was the first field test for the Purity Protocol's non-military phase engineered neglect. The words hit Eva like a physical blow. Her world hadn't just been abandoned, it had been murdered by apathy. A deliberate, calculated decision made in a sterile room by someone like the man standing next to her. And you were part of this. It wasn't a question. Silas finally turned to her. And for the first time, she saw not a prefect, but a man drowning in his own complicity. "I was a logician. I ran projections, analyzed cultural assimilation data. To me, they were numbers, statistical probabilities. I argued that the Rhodian genetic structure was too unpredictable to integrate. I flagged the Elysian colony for observation and non-intervention. I wrote the memos that signed death warrants for billions. And I did it because I believed in order, in a galaxy free of the chaos that I saw in you, in this ship." His gaze dropped to his own trembling hands. "The day I saw the final Purity Protocol, the active cleansing, the sanitizer fleets, I realized the final solution to the equation I had been working on was zero. Absolute silence. I filed a query, a single question about the ethical ramifications. That's why I was on the Stellarchus Purity. Not for an extraction, for an evaluation. They left me there to die with the evidence." The bridge fell silent, the only sound the low hum of the marigolds barely there life support. Ava's rage, a cold, hard thing she had carried for years, warred with the stark reality of their situation. This man was a monster, but he was their monster now, and he held the key. "The Veil is not a sanctuary," Silas said, his voice regaining a sliver of its analytical tone. "It is a collection of species who have defined themselves by their opposition to the Concordat. They will not welcome you. They will likely strip your ship for parts and sell me to the highest bidder. They'll listen, Ava said with more confidence than she felt. Because they're on that list, too. And when you're on a list like that, you listen to anyone who offers you a way to get off it. Entering the Veil was like flying into a shattered bottle. It wasn't a nebula of gas and dust, but a chaotic maelstrom of wreckage, failed stars, and rogue asteroid fields, all caught in the erratic gravitational pull of a collapsed neutron star that pulsed like a mad god's heartbeat. Standard nav computers went insane here. Long-range sensors were useless, blinded by the pulsar's radiation. It was a place where only the desperate or the damned dared to tread. The Marigold, with its patched-up hull and sputtering engines, fit right in. It took them 2 days to navigate the outer debris rings, flying on manual, with Jax calling out hazards and Grack on standby to physically absorb the shock of minor impacts against the bridge's reinforced viewport. Finally, they reached the heart of the Veil, a hollowed-out planetoid known as the Boneyard. It was a pirate city, a chaotic tangle of docked ships, makeshift habitats, and mining platforms all welded together into a sprawling, metallic tumor. Lights flickered from 1,000 different ports, and the space around it was thick with scavenger ships that darted about like angry hornets. They were swarmed the moment they were in range. 3 ships, brutal-looking things that were more engine and cannon than hull, boxed them in. A crackling voice filled their comms. Identify yourself. Scrap hauler. Or we'll turn you into more real estate for the Boneyard. Eva keyed the comm. This is the independent freighter Marigold. We're here to speak with the leader of the Veil. We have information of mutual interest. A harsh laugh was the only reply. The Bone Queen don't take meetings with junkers. State your business or prepare to be boarded. Eva glanced at Silas. It was time for the gambit. Patch a visual, she told Jax. A moment later, a scarred face appeared on their main screen. He was a Xylosian, a species of insectoid traders known for their pragmatism. Ava stood firm. My business is this. She stepped aside, pulling a stunned Silas into the frame. I'm bringing you a concordate prefect who wants to defect. And he brought a gift. The Xylosian's mandibles clicked in shock. His single, multifaceted eye zoomed in on Silas's immaculate uniform. The silence that followed was long and heavy. Finally, he spoke, his voice no longer mocking. Follow us, and make no sudden moves. The Queen will want to see this prize for herself. They were led to a massive, central docking bay carved into the heart of the asteroid. The interior was a city of controlled chaos. Walkways made of salvage plating crisscrossed vast caverns lit by the glow of forge fires and neon signs in a dozen alien languages. The air smelled of hot metal, spiced alien food, and uncirculated air. It was alive, vibrant, and dangerous. Waiting for them was a woman who could only be the Bone Queen. She was tall and lean, a member of the Cathar, a feline species with predatory grace and eyes that glowed with a faint, chilling intelligence. Scars crisscrossed her face, and she wore armor pieced together from the emblems of defeated Concordate ships. She sat on a throne made from the command chair of a Concordate cruiser, a clear and constant insult to her enemies. Her name was Kaylin. You have nerve, little junker, Kaylin said, her voice a low purr that held the promise of violence. Her gaze swept over Eva, Greg, and finally landed on Silas, who stood rigid, a beacon of pristine order in a world built from its antithesis, bringing one of them here. I should flay him and hang his perfect skin from my throne. He's more valuable alive," Eva said, holding her ground. "He has proof. The Concordate's purity protocol, a plan to exterminate every non-compliant species in the galaxy. Your people are on the list. So are the Rhodians. So are mine." She presented the data core. Kalen's top technician, a wiry human who looked like he'd been surgically attached to his datapad, took it and plugged it into their system. As the faces and designations flashed across a large screen behind the throne, a low murmur rippled through the assembled pirates and guards. The names and faces were familiar. They were their own. But Kalen's expression remained unreadable. "A list," she said with a dismissive flick of her wrist. "The Concordate has always had lists. This changes nothing. It only confirms what we already knew: they want us dead. Your proof is just a fancy funeral invitation. This is different." Silas interjected, finding his voice. "This isn't a policy of containment. It is a protocol for eradication. They have sanitizer fleets mobilized, moving to staging grounds on the galactic rim. They're not waiting for a reason anymore. They are coming to finish the job." Kalen rose from her throne and prowled toward them, circling them like a predator sizing up its prey. "And you expect me to believe you, a golden boy who suddenly grew a conscience. You expect me to risk my entire operation, my people, on the word of a junker, a brute, and a traitor." She stopped directly in front of Eva, their faces inches apart. "Words are cheap. Proof requires action." She turned and pointed a clawed finger at a star chart projected on the wall. A single system on the very edge of the veil was circled in red. The Concordate operates a deep space communications relay at Epsilon 9. It's their ear, listening to everything that happens in my territory. They think it's hidden. They think we're too stupid to find it. Her glowing eyes locked onto Eva's. "You want me to believe you're a threat to them? Then prove it. Go to Epsilon 9, rip the heart out of that station, and bring its command core back to me. Do that, and you'll have my attention. Fail," she added with a thin, this cruel smile, "and your ship will make a fine addition to my city's outer wall." Eva looked at the marigold on the docking display, a ship held together by little more than Hope and Grack's welding skills. She looked at her small, exhausted crew. Then she looked back at the Bone Queen, the embodiment of this lawless, brutal world they had sought out. They hadn't found a sanctuary. They had found an crucible. "We'll have it for you in 3 days, Eva said, her voice betraying no hint of the impossible weight of the promise she had just made. The 3 days Kalen had given them felt like a death sentence with a very short appeal. The marigold wasn't just damaged, she was dying. Hull fractures spiderwebbed across her spine. The primary reactor was held together with Grack's improvised welds and a desperate prayer, and the navigation computer had the processing power of an abacus. Leaving the Boneyard's dock in this state wasn't a mission, it was suicide. Eva knew it. Her crew knew it. And the Bone Queen was counting on it. Failure was the default setting in the Veil. Eva's first move wasn't to the engine room, but to the underbelly of the Boneyard, a sprawling, chaotic marketplace of scavenged tech and broken dreams known as the Gutter. With Grack as a silent, intimidating shadow, and Silas reluctantly in tow, his clean, white uniform drawing suspicious glares like a beacon in the gloom, she sought out a specific workshop. The place was a chaotic masterpiece of organized junk, run by a woman known only as Wren. She was a wiry Elysian, older than Eva, with a face like a cracked desert landscape and eyes that had seen too many stars die, a cybernetic arm, a crude, powerful-looking thing of pistons and exposed wiring, whirred softly as she worked, cutting apart a concordant sensor array with a plasma torch. Well. Ren rasped without looking up, her voice a gravelly echo of Eva's own people. Look what the solar wind blew in, another Elysian ghost. And she's brought a pet angel with her. Her gaze flicked to Silas, dripping with contempt. I'm here to trade. Ren, Eva said, ignoring the jibe. She gestured to a series of heavy-duty power converters she'd had Grake haul from the Marigold's dwindling stores. I need a cascade stabilizer for a Mark IV reactor, a set of navigational spoofers, and enough hull plating to patch a hole the size of a small moon. Ren finally powered down her torch and turned, wiping grease from her brow with her human hand. She circled them, her cybernetic eye clicking as it scanned their meager offerings. This is junk, barely worth the energy to melt it down. The parts you want, they cost. And the Bone Queen isn't known for her charity. I'm not asking for charity, Eva countered. I'm on a job for her. A big one. Help me. And when I get back, you'll have your pick of the salvage. Ren let out a harsh, barking laugh. No one comes back from Kalen's big jobs. That's the point. She sends the desperate out to die so she can claim their ships. You're not the first ghost she's sent on a suicide run. A cold dread settled in Eva's stomach, but she didn't let it show. This was the test. Not just the mission, but this. Surviving the Veil's own predatory nature. It was then that Silas, who had been silent and rigid, stepped forward. The concordant relay at Epsilon 9 uses a tri-wave encryption system based on quantum entanglement. Standard spoofers won't work, he said, his voice clipped and precise. However, their system has a diagnostic flaw. It prioritizes signal purity. If you can create enough chaotic, overlapping signals, what your people would call noise, you can blind it. You don't need a high-end spoofer. You need a signal amplifier tied directly into your ship's failing power grid. The more unstable the power source, the more effective the noise. Ren stared at Silas, her initial contempt slowly shifting to a grudging curiosity. She looked at the power converters again, then at Eva. He knows their tech. He designed half of it, Eva said flatly. Ren was silent for a long moment, the whir of her arm the only sound. The Bone Queen wants you to fail, she said finally. And I've got no love for her. Seeing her lose a bet for once, that might be worth a little investment. She kicked a pile of scrap metal with her boot. I'll give you the plating and the stabilizer. But you and your angel here are going to help me build your noisemaker from scratch. And you're going to give me that data core. Eva hesitated. That's our only leverage. No, Ren corrected, tapping her temple with a metallic finger. His knowledge is your leverage. The core is just a list of the dead. What's in his head is a list of ways to keep from joining them. The next 48 hours were a blur of frantic labor. In Ren's workshop, Silas, stripped of his pristine jacket and smudged with grease, found himself in a hell of his own making. He was forced to dissect the technology he had once revered, explaining its elegant weaknesses to this grizzled woman who treated concordant engineering with the respect one gives a stubborn bolt. He and Ren, an unlikely duo of creator and scavenger, worked feverishly, building a monstrous device of exposed conduits and salvaged amplifiers that looked more like a bomb than a piece of tech. Meanwhile, on the Marigold, Grack and Jax worked without sleep. Grack, a master of metal, directed a small army of loader drones, welding the new plates over the ship's wounds. The Marigold began to look less like a ghost and more like a scarred beast. Its hull, a patchwork quilt of different alloys and colors. Jax, guided by Silas's relayed instructions, tore apart their comm system, integrating the crude but powerful signal jammer directly into the ship's main power conduit, turning the entire vessel into a potential weapon of electronic warfare. Eva moved between both teams, a conduit for information and a relentless driver of progress. She bartered their remaining non-essentials for fuel, negotiated with a surly Rhodian for munitions, and stood guard over Silas, keenly aware that half the criminals in the boneyard would kill him for the bounty the Concordat had surely placed on his head. During a rare break, she found him staring at the half-finished jammer, his hands trembling slightly. "It feels like sacrilege," he admitted, his voice low. "This technology, it's meant to create clarity, to connect the galaxy in a web of perfect order. We're twisting it into an instrument of chaos. The galaxy you wanted was a quiet graveyard," Eva said, handing him a canteen of recycled water. "I prefer a noisy workshop. At least things get built here." He looked at her, at the grease on her cheek and the exhaustion in her eyes. And for the first time, he didn't see a contaminant. He saw a survivor. When the work was done, the Marigold was transformed. She was uglier than ever, a brutalist collage of mismatched parts. But she was solid. The reactor hummed with a stable, angry energy. And bolted to her spine was the jammer, a grotesque antenna array that pulsed with a low, chaotic thrum. Wren stood at the docking clamp, her cybernetic arm crossed over her chest. "It'll work," she said. "Maybe. But the station isn't just automated defenses. There will be a prefect in command. And they don't get that rank by being stupid. Be prepared for a human variable." As they powered up, Eva looked at her crew. Jax, his face pale with fatigue, but his eyes bright with nervous energy. Grack, standing at his post, a silent mountain of readiness. And Silas, now dressed in a simple gray jumpsuit, his prefect uniform left in a pile of refuse in Wren's workshop. He looked smaller without it, but somehow more present. "Let's go make some noise," Eva said. The journey to Epsilon 9 was tense and silent. The relay station was located in a dead zone of space, a patch of eerie blackness where stellar drift had swept away most debris. It made the station alone. Perfect target, and any ship approaching it would stand out like a flaw on a diamond. The station itself was a thing of cold, terrifying beauty, a crystalline sphere, hundreds of kilometers long, that glowed with a soft, internal white light. It didn't have gun turrets or missile pods. Its entire surface was a phased energy array, capable of vaporizing anything that came within its kill zone. "They know we're here," Jax whispered, his hands hovering over his console. "Their passive sensors would have picked up our energy signature the moment we dropped from the jump. They see a single, low-tier freighter with a failing reactor core and a chaotic energy signature." Silas corrected from the station next to him. He was monitoring the Concordat's automated response patterns to their system. "We are not a threat. We are cosmic refuse, an anomaly to be logged, not engaged." This was the core of their plan. They wouldn't approach as a warship, or even as a stealth vessel. They would approach as what they were, a piece of junk. Eva took the helm. Grack! I want you to vent the plasma conduits. Just a little. Make us look sick. A plume of iridescent gas erupted from the port nacelle. Jax, activate the jammer. Let's give them a headache. Jax slammed his hand down on a newly installed, unlabeled red button. The lights on the bridge flickered violently, and a deep, gut-wrenching hum vibrated through the deck. The ship's energy signature, once a sputtering mess, devolved into a screaming, incoherent wall of static. On the tactical display, the pristine icon of the Epsilon 9 station suddenly sprouted a halo of error codes. Its automated targeting systems began to twitch, unable to lock onto the storm of electronic noise that was the Marigold. "They're blind," Jax said, a grin spreading across his face. "Their perfect AI can't make sense of this much imperfection." They drifted closer, tumbling end over end like a disabled ship caught in a gravity eddy. A cloud of vented gas and electronic chaos concealing their deliberate, slow approach. They were a flaw in the system, a ghost in the machine that the machine was not programmed to understand. But Wren's warning echoed in Eva's mind. Aboard the Epsilon 9 relay, Prefect Thorn watched the anomaly on his main view screen with a cool, analytical detachment. He was a man carved from ice, with pale eyes that missed nothing. His subordinates were reporting the sensor glitches, recommending a standard diagnostic purge. But Thorn saw something else. He saw the vented plasma, not as a random leak, but as a deliberate screen. He saw the electronic noise, not as a malfunction, but as a broadcast. And he saw the ship's slow, deliberate tumble, not as uncontrolled drift, but as a carefully managed approach vector. "It's a trick," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "A primitive, chaotic, disgustingly human trick." His fingers danced over his command console. He bypassed the automated defenses, taking manual control of a single, focused energy lance. The AI advised against it, citing a 99.8% probability that the target was non-hostile space debris. Thorn ignored it. He trusted the 0.2%. He trusted his gut. On the bridge of the Marigold, just as they moved into the station's blind spot near a maintenance airlock, a single, piercing alarm cut through the bridge. "Energy spike," Jax yelled. "Direct targeting, manual override." Before Eva could react, a lance of pure white energy, thin as a needle and bright as a sun, shot from the station. It didn't hit the hull. It didn't hit the engines. It sliced through the grotesque antenna array of their jammer, vaporizing it instantly. The gut-wrenching hum died. The lights on the bridge stabilized. The electronic storm vanished, and they were left naked, exposed, and utterly silent, clinging to the side of a Concordat superweapon that now knew, without a doubt, exactly who and what they were. An amplified, galaxy-wide alarm began to sound over their comms, a serene female voice repeating a single, chilling phrase: "Purity protocol engaged. Sanitize the contaminant. Sanitize the contaminant." The silence on the bridge of the Marigold was more terrifying than the chaos that had preceded it. It was the silence of a trap sprung, the moment of stunned stillness before the jaws snap shut. The galaxy-wide alarm, a calm, melodic harbinger of annihilation, was a death knell broadcast across the stars. He was waiting for us. Eva breathed, her knuckles white where she gripped the helm. He let us get close. "Prefect Thorn," Silas said, his face pale. He was my rival at the academy. He doesn't trust systems. He trusts his own instincts. He would see our chaos not as a flaw, but as a signature. On the main screen, the Epsilon 9 station began to glow, its entire crystalline surface humming with unimaginable power. It wasn't preparing to fire a single lance. It was preparing to unleash a 360-degree wave of energy that would atomize them and everything else within a 1,000-kilometer radius. We have less than 2 minutes until that thing fires, Jax said, his voice tight with fatalism. We can't outrun it. Our jump drive needs at least 5 to cycle. Then we don't run, Eva declared, a fierce, desperate light in her eyes. We go in. Grak, prepare for emergency docking. I'm taking us straight into that maintenance airlock he exposed when he took his shot. It was a move born of pure insanity. Flying a wounded freighter into the side of a superweapon that was about to detonate was not a recognized military tactic, but it was an Ava Rostova tactic. She slammed the thrusters forward, not in a controlled burn, but in a series of violent, unpredictable bursts, bucking the ship like a wild animal. The station's localized point defense cannons, expecting a fleeing target, struggled to track their erratic, suicidal charge. Grak, in the forward airlock, used the Marigold's own magnetic docking clamps not for a gentle seal, but as grappling hooks. With a groaning screech of tortured metal, the clamps slammed into the station's hull, biting into the crystalline alloy. The impact sent a shudder through the entire ship, and for a terrifying second, it felt like the Marigold would tear itself in half. We're latched, Grak roared over the comms. But the outer door is sealed. I can't cut through it in time. We don't go through it, Eva yelled, her plan already a step ahead. We make our own door. She rerouted the last dregs of their overloaded engine power, not to the thrusters, but to the forward shields. Jax, overload the shield emitters. All of them. Right now, Jax's eyes widened in understanding. He didn't question it. His fingers flew, bypassing every safety protocol. The forward view screen turned a blinding white as the shields, designed to repel energy, were forced to contain it. The ship groaned. The lights flickered and died, plunging the bridge into darkness lit only by the red glow of emergency alerts and the terrifyingly bright energy building outside. Brace, Eva screamed. The shield emitters exploded. The focused, directed blast of energy, with nowhere else to go, punched forward. It struck the station's hull at point-blank range, a desperate kamikaze blow. The crystalline structure, designed to withstand distant attacks, fractured like glass under the intimate, overwhelming force. An enormous, jagged hole was blasted open in the side of the Epsilon 9 station. The Marigold, its front half now fused to the station's superstructure, became an impromptu and very ugly docking tube. The moment the breach was made, the internal atmosphere of the station began venting explosively into space, sucking debris and shredded metal with it. Go, Eva commanded, grabbing her plasma cutter. She led the charge, a small, heavily armed team consisting of herself, Grak, and Silas. They didn't have time for elegance. They were a virus, injected directly into the heart of the machine. The corridors of the station were a pristine white nightmare, now scarred by the explosion and littered with the bodies of concordant technicians sucked out into the void or killed by the explosive decompression. Emergency blast doors were slamming shut all around them, trying to contain the breach. The command core is in the central spire. 3 levels up, Silas shouted over the roaring wind and screeching alarms, his knowledge of concorded architecture now their most vital weapon. We have to get there before the purge cycle completes. They moved with a desperate urgency. Grack, a 4-armed engine of destruction, tore a jammed blast door from its hinges with his bare hands. Eva used her plasma cutter not to open locks, but to carve smoking, impromptu doorways through walls. Silas, an unlikely soldier, guided them through the sterile labyrinth, pointing out security conduits to disable and structural weaknesses to exploit. It was chaos and precision combined, the brutal pragmatism of the Veil married to the intimate knowledge of a traitor. They reached the command spire just as the station's external energy field reached its peak. The entire structure vibrated around them, a low, bone-jarring hum that signaled imminent self-destruction. The spire was a vast, circular chamber, its walls a seamless display of tactical data. In the center, on a raised platform, stood Prefect Thorn, his face a mask of cold fury. He was alone, flanked by 2 automated defense turrets that immediately swiveled to track them. Contaminants. Thorn hissed, his voice echoing in the chamber. You have dirtied my station. Your chaotic intrusion is like a disease, but the fever is about to break. It's over. Thorn Silas yelled, stepping forward. The protocol is a lie. It's not about purity. It's about genocide. Thorn let out a short, sharp laugh. Purity is genocide. You sentimental fool. It is the removal of the imperfect, the chaotic, the dissonant. We are not murderers. We are gardeners, weeding a chaotic field so that a single, perfect flower may grow. He raised a hand, and the turrets began to whine, charging their weapons. But Grack was faster. He had anticipated the move, and with a roar, he hurled a heavy, magnetized power conduit he'd ripped from a wall during their ascent. The conduit slammed into one of the turrets, shorting it out in a shower of sparks. Ava opened fire on the other, her plasma bolts scoring deep, molten gashes across its armored plating. Thorn, seeing his automated defenses fail, didn't panic. He calmly walked to the central console. You are too late. The purge cannot be stopped from here. It can only be redirected. He pressed a final command. On the main screen, a schematic of the station appeared. The wave of energy was no longer omnidirectional. It was focusing, channeling itself down the length of the crystalline spire, turning the entire station into a directed energy cannon of planetary-scale power. And it was aimed directly at the boneyard. If I am to be removed, Thorn said with a chilling smile, I will take your chaotic little pirate city with me. I will sanitize your entire nest from 100 light years away. Ava stared in horror. This was his endgame, not just to kill them, but to use his own death to cripple the entire Veil, to punish them for their very existence. But Silas saw something else. He saw the energy conduits flashing on the schematic, the flow of power being rerouted. He saw the logic, the cold, perfect equations Thorn was using. And he saw the flaw. He's bypassed the safety protocols Silas realized aloud. To focus the beam that tightly, he had to disable the primary energy regulators. The entire system is running hot, unstable. He pointed to a series of crystalline pillars that rose from the floor to the ceiling, pulsing with a blinding white light. Those are the core regulators. If we can disrupt them, the energy flow will destabilize. It won't just stop the beam, it will feed back into the core, and tear the station apart from the inside. It was a suicide mission within a suicide mission. They had seconds. Eva didn't hesitate. Grek the pillars. Grek needed no other instruction. He charged, a four-armed behemoth of righteous fury, and slammed his entire body into the nearest regulator. The crystalline structure groaned, then cracked, spiderwebs of dark energy spreading across its surface. Thorn drew a sleek, silver sidearm and fired, the energy bolt striking Grek in the shoulder. The Rhodian roared in pain but did not relent, pulling at the fractured pillar with his bare hands. Ava laid down, covering fire, her plasma bolts forcing Thorn to take cover behind the console. She fought with a desperate, savage intensity, her movements no longer those of a scavenger, but of a soldier defending her home, her people, her entire chaotic, imperfect corner of the galaxy. Silas, the man of numbers and logic, did the last thing anyone would have expected. He ran, not away from the fight, but directly toward the central console where Thorn was hiding. He held no weapon, only a single, heavy datapad he'd grabbed from a fallen technician. Thorn rose to fire, but Silas was too close. He slammed the heavy pad into Thorn's hand, shattering the bones and sending the weapon clattering across the floor. He then began typing furiously on the command console, not trying to stop the countdown, but to accelerate it, to shorten the feedback loop he knew was coming. "What are you doing?" Thorn screamed, clutching his broken hand. "I am correcting a variable," Silas said, his face illuminated by the console's frantic red alerts. "My variable. Outside. Grak." With a final, monumental effort, tore the first regulator pillar from its moorings. A raw, uncontrolled torrent of energy erupted into the room. A second pillar shattered from the overload. The station began to scream, the sound of a billion crystals breaking at once. The floor buckled. The ceiling cracked. The focused beam of light aimed at the boneyard wavered, then collapsed into a swirling vortex of uncontrolled energy. "Ava, go, now," Silas yelled, shoving her toward the breach they had made. "The marigold is your only chance." Eva grabbed a wounded but still conscious Grak, pulling him toward the exit. She looked back one last time. Silas stood before the console, a small, defiant figure silhouetted against the heart of a dying star. Thorn lunged at him, a mad snarl on his face. The two men, two sides of the same orderly, broken coin, grappled for a moment before they were both consumed by a wave of pure, white energy as the station's core went critical. Ava and Grak threw themselves through the jagged hole back into the marigold just as the Epsilon 9 station imploded. There was no grand explosion, but a silent, violent collapse. The crystalline sphere folded in on itself, crushed by its own unleashed power, before vanishing in a flash of light that was so bright it was black. The shockwave hit the marigold like the fist of a god, tearing it free from the wreckage and sending it tumbling, broken and powerless, into the void. On the bridge, Jax, who had been desperately trying to restart their systems, watched the station die on a flickering auxiliary screen. He had no way of knowing if they had succeeded, if anyone was even still alive on the command deck. He just sat in the captain's chair, in the dark, surrounded by the groans of a dying ship, and waited. Minutes later, the internal comm crackled to life. It was Iva's voice, weak, strained, but unmistakably alive. "Jax, you still with us?" A wave of relief so profound it almost buckled him, washed over the young pilot. "Barely." "Captain," he managed to choke out, "the reactor is dead. Life support is running on battery. We're just floating." "Good." Eva's voice came back, a little stronger now. Floating is good. Floating means we're not dead. He heard a deep groan in the background. Grack. Now, I need you to do me a favor. Find the emergency broadcast beacon, the old one, the one that runs on a chemical battery. I want you to send a message to the Bone Queen. There was a pause. Tell her we have her command core, and tell her the Concordat just went blind. The message, a tiny, defiant pulse of radio waves, began to emanate from the wreck of the Marigold. It was a message sent from a ghost ship, crewed by a scavenger, a brute, and the memory of a traitor. A message that said they had faced the perfect Sidorderly void and had left it a little more chaotic and a lot more free. The void was a cold, silent coffin. For 3 days, the Marigold drifted, a powerless hulk bleeding its last traces of heat into the uncaring dark. On the bridge, the only light came from a single emergency strip, casting a ghostly pallor on the faces of the survivors. Grek, his arm crudely bandaged, lay still on the deck, a mountain of quiet pain. Jax was slumped in his chair, running diagnostics on a dead console out of sheer, desperate habit. Eva stood at the main viewport, staring into the blackness, her reflection a tired, spectral image superimposed over the distant stars. They had won. They were also dying. The chemical battery powering the emergency beacon was their last. Tiny spark of defiance in an overwhelming emptiness. Just as the recycled air began to taste thin and metallic, a flicker of light appeared on the edge of the void. It wasn't the clean, sterile warp signature of a Concordat vessel. This was a messy, brutal tear in space-time, and from it emerged the Bone Queen's flagship, the Retribution. It was a monstrosity. A refitted Concordat dreadnought covered in jagged spikes and pirate insignia, looking less like a ship and more like a predator's snarl given form. It was followed by a small fleet of Veil cruisers, their hulls scarred and mismatched, their engines glowing with a hungry, impatient light. They surrounded the dead Marigold, their docking lights sweeping over her battered hull like vultures sizing up a carcass. Independent freighter Marigold. Kalen's voice, a low and dangerous purr, filled their comms, which Jax had managed to power with the last gasp from a capacitor. You sent a message. You claimed a prize. I have come to collect. Eva keyed the comm, her voice rough from dehydration. We did what you asked. Epsilon 9 is gone. Thorn is dead. Words. Kalen purred. You are to bring me its command core as proof. A cold silence hung between the ships. Eva had no core. Her proof was a memory, an act of sacrifice that a pragmatist like Kalen would likely dismiss as a fool's failure. Our proof is our survival, Eva said, her voice hard as steel, and the silence from Epsilon 9. You have listening posts. Check them. The Concordat's eye in your territory has been blinded. Another long pause. Then, Kalen's voice returned, a shade less mocking. I see the wound on your ship. The point of impact is fused with a crystalline alloy my sensors do not recognize, an alloy that matches the energy signature of a Concordat relay. Docking clamps are extended. My people will come aboard. If you have lied, your deaths will be slow. The boarding party was not a rescue team. They were heavily armed Cathar warriors, their glowing eyes scanning every corner of the crippled ship. They found Grek, wounded but alive, and their medics, rough but efficient, Tended to him, they found the scorched and twisted remains of the forward shields and the gaping hole where the jammer used to be. They saw a ship that had not just fought, but had clawed its way through hell. On the bridge, Kaylin herself came aboard, her armored form filling the cramped space. She looked at the dead consoles, the cracked viewport, and the exhausted crew. Her gaze fell on Grak, who now sat propped against a bulkhead. "The Junker Queen speaks the truth," Grak rumbled, his deep voice resonating with authority. "I saw it. I saw the traitor, the angel, break the machine from within. I saw him burn in its heart to save us all." Kaylin circled the bridge, her claws tapping thoughtfully on a dead panel. She stopped in front of Eva. A man of order chose chaos. She mused. A prefect sacrificed himself for a city of pirates. This is a story I would not have believed. She turned to her warriors. "Salvage what you can. Tow this piece of junk back to the boneyard, and give them a place of honor at the forge." For the first time, a flicker of something other than suspicion crossed her face. "It seems I owe you a debt. Little Junker, and the Bone Queen always pays her debts." Back in the chaotic, vibrant heart of the Vale, the story of the Marigold spread like wildfire. They were no longer just junkers. They were legends. The ship itself was brought to Ren's massive workshop, where the old Elysian scavenger looked at the catastrophic damage with a look of profound, professional respect. "You didn't just scratch it," she said, her cybernetic eye clicking as it scanned the fused hull. "You gave it a soul." The crew of the Marigold had little time to rest. Kaylin was true to her word. She convened a war council, a gathering of the most powerful and ruthless pirate lords, faction leaders, and resistance cells in the Vale. They met in the cavernous chamber of her throne room, a motley assembly of species united only by their shared hatred of the Concordate. Kaylin stood before them, with Eva at her side. For generations, we have snapped at the heels of the Concordate, like scavengers. The Bone Queen began, her voice echoing off the metallic walls. "We steal their cargo, we raid their outposts, and we hide in the shadows of this graveyard. We have survived, but we have not lived." She gestured to Eva. "This human, this junker, has shown us the truth. The Concordate does not see us as a nuisance. They see us as a contamination, and they have built the means to cleanse us from the galaxy." She played the contents of the data core. Ren had copied the faces, the designations, the cold, bureaucratic death sentences. A low, angry murmur grew into a roar. "They have the fleets, the technology, the numbers." A hulking Xylosian captain snarled, "We are a disorganized rabble. To declare open war is to commit suicide." It was the moment of truth. All eyes turned to Eva. This was her battle to win. She stepped forward, her simple mechanic's jumpsuit a stark contrast to the ornate armor and tribal markings of the assembly. "We are a rabble," Eva agreed, her voice clear and steady. "We are chaotic. We are unpredictable. Our ships are held together with rust and spite, and that is our greatest weapon." She looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of insectoids, reptilians, and a dozen other species. The Concordate's strength is its perfection. Its systems are flawless. Its logic is absolute, and its strategy is based on predictable outcomes. We are not a predictable outcome. When their perfect ship met my broken one, it was the perfect one that shattered. She told them of Silas, not as a hero, but as a logician who saw the final terrible sum of his own equations. He didn't die for a noble cause. She said, he died to correct a variable. And we are all variables they cannot solve. They expect us to fight like soldiers. Let's fight like survivors. Let's use their order against them. Let's be the noise they cannot filter, the chaos they cannot calculate. A sudden, piercing alarm cut through the chamber. Kalen's chief tactician shouted from a comms console. Majesty, a Concordate fleet has just warped to the edge of the Veil. A sanitizer fleet. 20 ships. They're broadcasting on all channels. A voice, the same calm, serene female voice from Epsilon 9 filled the air. The contaminant source has been identified. Commencing system-wide purification. All non-compliant life will be sanitized. The debate was over. The war had come to them. Kalen looked at Eva, a predatory grin spreading across her face. It seems you get to test your theory. Little Junker. To your ships. We will show them what a real disease looks like. The battle for the Veil was not a clash of fleets. It was a collision of philosophies. The Concordate fleet advanced in a perfect, flawless V formation, a spear of white light and clean energy aimed at the heart of the boneyard. The Veil's fleet was a chaotic swarm. Ships of every size and design poured out of the asteroid city, their engines spitting dirty plasma, their formations non-existent. It was a beautiful, terrifying mess. Eva was not on a flagship. She was on the bridge of the Marigold, which had been hastily patched by Wren and her crew not for a long fight, but for a single, final purpose. The ship was a flying bomb. Wren had helped them rig the unstable reactor, now glowing an angry cherry red, directly to the remnants of their signal jammer. The moment that core breaches, it won't just explode. Wren had explained, it will unleash a wave of pure, chaotic energy, an electromagnetic pulse that will fry every perfect, unprotected circuit in that fleet. It will turn their thinking machines into bricks. Kalen's fleet engaged first, not in a frontal assault, but as a distraction. They used the debris fields as cover, darting out to fire and retreating back into the swirling junk. Their hit-and-run tactics forcing the Concordate fleet to break its perfect formation. The Concordate AI, unable to process the sheer randomness of the attack, began to falter, but the sanitizer ships were powerful, their weapons precise. For every pirate victory, 2 Veil ships were vaporized into nothing. They were buying time, bleeding for it. Now, Eva. Kalen's voice crackled over the comm. Give them hell. Eva took the helm of her dying ship for the last time. Jax. You ready? The young pilot nodded, his face grim. The overload sequence is keyed in. Once we start, there's no stopping it. Grake. The huge Rhodian stood behind her chair. A solid, unmovable presence. I will hold her together. He rumbled. The Marigold shot forward, not toward the enemy fleet, but on a trajectory that would take her directly into the path of the Veil's own pulsar, the mad god's heart that gave the region its chaotic energy. They'll follow us, Eva said. They'll see a lone, wounded ship and classify it as a priority target to maintain order. She was right. 3 sanitizer cruisers broke from the main battle and moved to intercept them, their movements smooth and certain. Jax, give them a little noise, Eva ordered. Jax activated the jury-rigged jammer, and the Marigold once again became a ghost of screaming static. The Concordate ship's targeting systems flickered. It was the opening they needed. Full power to the engines. Ava commanded. The Marigold groaned in protest, a final, agonized cry as she plunged toward the pulsing neutron star. The concordate ships pursued, determined to erase this final bit of static. "It's time," Ava said, her voice soft. She looked at her crew, her family. "It's been an honor flying with you." She keyed the comm to the escape pod. "Eject. Now." "Captain, Jax started." "That's an order." "Jax." She snapped. With a hiss and a jolt, the small cockpit section containing the bridge crew ejected from the main body of the Marigold. As their pod shot away, they watched their home, their ghost, continue its final, suicidal dive. The 3 concordate ships closed in, their weapons firing, tearing the Marigold apart piece by piece. But it was too late. Just as the ship reached the pulsar's corona, Jax, from the pod, sent the final command. The reactor core breached. For a moment, there was only light. A silent, impossible wave of white and black energy erupted from the heart of the Marigold, amplified 1,000 times by the pulsar's radiation. It wasn't an explosion of fire and shrapnel. It was an explosion of pure chaos. The wave washed over the 3 pursuing ships, and their lights went out. It swept through the rest of the concordate fleet, and their perfect formations crumbled. Engines died. Weapon systems failed. Navigation computers went dark. The entire sanitizer fleet, so perfect and deadly moments before, was now just a collection of drifting, powerless coffins. The Veil fleet, whose crude, hardened systems were largely immune, fell upon them like wolves. Weeks later, the galaxy was a different place. The Concordate, its purity protocol exposed, and one of its prized sanitizer fleets annihilated by a rabble, was reeling. Rebellions and uprisings, inspired by the news from the Veil, began to pop up in a dozen systems. The great, silent order was broken. The galaxy was noisy again. On the bridge of a new ship, Iv Rostova looked out at the stars. The vessel was a hybrid, built by Wren and the best engineers in the Veil. Its hull a patchwork of a dozen different designs. Its systems robust and redundant. It was ugly, powerful, and alive. On its hull was a new name, the Variable. Jax sat at the nav console, older and more somber, but with a new confidence in his eyes. Grax stood watch, a silent guardian, his new cybernetic arm, a gift from Wren, gleaming under the bridge lights. They weren't scavengers anymore. They were the first line of defense for a new, chaotic alliance of worlds that refused to be silent. They had not brought peace to the galaxy, but they had given it a voice. Ava looked at the star chart, at the flickering lights of nascent rebellions, and the dark, receding territories of the Concordate. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, it felt like a fight they could win. She gripped the worn, familiar controls of the captain's chair, a faint smile on her lips. The galaxy had called her ship a ghost, but she had taught it that ghosts can be loud, and they leave scars that the perfect and the pure can never erase.